As it's halfway through November now, many of you will have been revising for mocks over the past few weeks, or will be about to start. But for Year 11s and definitely Year 10s, revision and different revision strategies may be a new concept to you. So because of this, I thought it would be a good idea to go over revision in a detailed video, including what strategies can you use, which techniques are effective and which aren't, and what else may impact you as you strive to get the best grades possible. Let's jump into it. Before we take a look at each revision technique individually, it's important that we first take a look at revision as an overall concept, as there are a number of things that will impact how effective your revision is, even before you start. So take a note of the following variables, as they can definitely limit the quality of your revision and how effective it will be. There are going to be many neurological reasons as to why sleep is going to be beneficial for you, but for now I'll just keep it simple and say that in order to maximize the effectiveness of your revision, sleep is key. If you are tired, you will have lower concentration levels, will complete lower quality revision, remember less, and won't be able to revise for as long, all of which will have a negative impact. Sleep is also considered to be linked to the process of information and memory, so please remember to find your sleep revision balance, as an all-nighter is not going to be beneficial for you either in the long or short term. Everyone will be slightly different with how much sleep they need, so I'm not going to give any specific recommendations, but I will say for the vast majority of people, if you're getting 6 hours or less a night, you probably aren't getting enough. Similarly to sleep, there are many reasons why both food and exercise can influence the effectiveness of your revision, but they would both probably need an entire video each alone to cover them in depth. So for now, I'll keep it simple and just say that if you are hungry when trying to revise, testing yourself, or for the actual exam itself, you will have a lower attention span and won't be working optimally as a result. I'm not going to give a nutrition lesson here, but just keep it simple and make sure that you've eaten within a relatively close proximity to studying so that hunger is not an issue and consequently a limiting factor to your success. In terms of exercise, with revision, being cooped up inside for long periods can be tough on you mentally, so exercise can be great for clearing your head in that regard, alongside many other benefits. So I would say that a good strategy would be to at least go for a walk once a day. Me personally, I do this every day regardless of what I'm doing during the day, and it really does make a world of difference. So bear that in mind when you're planning your revision. In order for your revision to be as effective as possible, it's important that you avoid distractions. I know it may be tempting, but do not multitask and mix your revision with other things, and yes, that does include your phone. If you feel like you may be distracted easily by your phone, put it out of reach or in another room so that you're less likely to break up your revision. What you can also do is set and plan specific revision time with breaks to go on your phone, and definitely don't be afraid to space these out throughout your schedule if you feel like this will make your study time more sustainable and make it less likely that you'll go on your phone while you're in the process of revising. You'll also have to make a decision as to whether to have music or not. The actual science for using music while learning is mixed, with it helping some people and hindering others, so this will have to be a decision that you make on your own individually. In some cases, music may make revision more entertaining and therefore make it more likely that you'll persevere, but for others it will be a distraction, so figure out which of these you are. I know that for me personally, I've never been one of those people that can concentrate on working with music in the background, so some of you may be like me. Also, when you're planning your revision schedule, including free time is key, and it's important that you specifically plan for this. Definitely don't just revise constantly, as you'll burn out very quickly, and this will be detrimental to your grades long term, so try and find the balance between revision and having fun. For those of you starting revision for the first time, or just those of you who really want to maximize their grades, figuring out how to revise can be quite a daunting task, as there are many different revision techniques, and with GCSE and A Level exams returning, increased pressure as well. But hopefully the rest of this video should help you out, as I'll be covering the various revision techniques, including the ones I would recommend that you avoid, as well as the ones that I would use if I were in your position. A few things to take note of before I go into the various techniques. Some of these strategies may be more effective for you than others, which is understandable considering how complicated the human brain is. It is most likely going to be very beneficial to utilize more than one technique when you're revising, and also don't be afraid to change a technique if it's not working for you. This is part of the reason why mocks can be very useful, as they can be a pretty strong indicator of whether your chosen revision technique is working. And finally, also remember how effective a revision technique or strategy is may also depend on the subject, as some techniques may be more appropriate and effective for subjects that utilize a lot of numbers, such as maths, and others more effective at word-heavy subjects such as English. Now, let's first take a look at the revision techniques that you should avoid. Now, I'm aware that when you first start out revising, in many cases you will directly be told to use some of these techniques, but these techniques have been shown to be pretty ineffective according to science. Highlighting may be useful for identifying areas that you still need to cover, but in terms of learning, it's very ineffective and has been found to potentially even hinder revision. Similarly to highlighting, rereading notes is just a very passive way to revise. It doesn't force you to recall any information, and it also leaves plenty of space for your mind to wander off onto other things and for you to lose focus, which will definitely be detrimental to your revision. When looking at summarizing notes, again, it's a very passive way to revise, as you're effectively copying what's already in front of you and doesn't require any sort of recall. Now, the only time I would consider summarizing notes would be if you were doing it blind without a textbook in front of you, as this will require recall and your brain to fetch the information, which would be beneficial. And finally, looking at cramming, as I'll explain in a little bit, distributed practice or spaced revision has been shown to be a very effective strategy, which cramming is the complete opposite of. So if you want to be successful at GCSE or A Level, avoid it. So now I've covered which revision techniques you should avoid, let's take a look at which ones you should use. Now, I'll start off by saying that your revision should include 3 main factors that should maximize your chances of success, with these being active recall, testing yourself, and distributed practice, otherwise known as spaced repetition. Now, some of you may be thinking, what the hell does that mean? Well, starting off with active recall, it is the process of stimulating your memory by forcing your brain to retrieve information. Now, what does active recall actually look like in practice? Well, one example would be to read a topic or section of a revision guide or notes that you made earlier in a lesson, and then with the book closed, write down as much information as you can about the topic that you've just read without looking at the textbook. That's the most important part, and I can't emphasize that enough. Now, this method of active recall is very similar to blurting, which you might have heard of. If you haven't, blurting is where you write down as much information as you can remember about a certain topic or subject, really testing the retrieval of information from your memory. Another great example of active recall is using flashcards, and the great thing about technology is you don't even have to write them by hand anymore. Just use something like Quizlet or Anki. Now, moving on to the second important pillar of effective revision, testing yourself. Now, there is quite a big crossover between testing yourself and active recall, which is part of the reason why it's so effective, but there are other aspects of testing yourself that aren't necessarily active recall based that are vital for exam success, hence why I've made it into its own section. Testing yourself can include question and answers, past papers, or any other activity that forces you to retrieve information to answer a question. Now, other than helping you memorize content, testing yourself is so effective because it's the form of revision that most resembles exams. So by using resources such as past papers, you'll learn and develop your exam technique, which depending on the subject can make up a large proportion of the marks in an exam. And in my opinion, if you were just to choose one revision technique that would get you the highest grade, doing something like question and answer or just doing past papers would probably be the most effective. And my advice for anyone doing GCSE or A Levels in 2022 is do as many past papers as you can physically stomach. Work through a past paper in exam conditions with no help, then use the mark scheme to see where you went wrong and identify your weaknesses, then use the active recall methods I've outlined earlier in this video to work on these specific areas, and then take another past paper to see if you've improved, which if you do this process enough, you definitely will. The final key aspect of revision is spaced repetition, otherwise referred to as distributed practice. This technique is where you plan to learn during spaced out intervals so as to best retain the information in your long-term memory. Now, for an example of what this actually means in practice is if, let's say, you learned something on a particular day, you would then review this information multiple times prior to having to use it in an exam. But the time periods between each time you review this content gets longer each time. So for example, the first time you review this content would be, say, 3 days after you first learnt it. Then the second time would maybe be a week after this. The third time could be 2 or 3 weeks later after that time. And then finally, you may review it a month or a month and a half after. You get where I'm going with this. This is why planning your revision ahead of time can be so effective and useful, and also why cramming isn't that effective for memorizing things. Now, as I said earlier on in this video, the way people learn and revise best may vary depending on them. So because of this, here are some supplementary techniques that you could use on top of the other techniques that I've already outlined in this video to maximize your revision. One example of this is revision with friends. Now, using this during your revision can be a bit of a double-edged sword, as doing questions and answers with your friends or explaining topics to your friends can be really beneficial, but there's also the downside that they may distract you. So you'll have to figure out which of these is more likely to happen to you and decide whether to use it accordingly. Also, looking at videos videos on YouTube to explain a topic. If you're struggling to understand it, can be really beneficial, but I would note just watching a YouTube video on a topic probably isn't going to cement it in your memory, so I would use this alongside something like active recall. So to summarize, in order for you to get the best grades in 2022, the scientific research suggests that you should use active recall, regularly test yourself, revise a topic multiple times in a spaced manner. Also, don't be afraid to use additional revision or study help, and make sure that you get enough sleep, food and exercise so that these factors don't limit your revision or your concentration. I hope you found this video useful and informative. If you have, feel free to like and subscribe, and if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments or message me on my other forms of social media, and if not, enjoy the rest of your day.